So when we think about consent decrees, right, we are looking for a few things, right? So first kind of problem that we have, right, is this problem of identification. In that, how do we identify and find problematic police departments before they become a problem, right? Because we know a couple things, right? There really isn't a national repository for police misconduct data, so there is no uh, data repository for police misconduct. It's really hard to define. I don't. That word is not spelled correctly. Repository. That looks out. Look, you can spend a little time sounding at the word. You can figure it out. So there's no data repository for police misconduct. By the way, share a little secret with you. I don't think my handwriting is stellar by any means, right? But sometimes, oof, man, when an F turns out right, it feels so good. So we have police misconduct, right? So it's really hard to really identify patterns or practices when there's definitional changes across police departments, across states, and there's no data to collect, right? We really don't know who is a bad police department because we don't collect data on it, right? So this creates a problem then, because if the Department of Justice is tasked with trying to figure out correct the worst behavior, what do we do? What do we do with that situation, right? So typically, what ends up happening, right, is that we'll have media accounts. So like it'll be all the news, like LAPD strikes down man after car chase. That's a reference to the Rodney King incident. So there could be the media account of ongoing problems, especially if they're particularly severe. And this is really the most common method. Is if a news story breaks about a series of patterns of going on, or if something is of tremendous importance that involve police, then you can usually attract a lot of attention for this, right? In other cases, right, outside of the media accounts that kind of come in here, right, we also know that sometimes agencies will self-report. They'll say a new police chief will come in and they'll say, "Hey, I think we got a problem here. Can you investigate us?" Right. So that's like another way that these often agencies get found and reported. Sometimes people will complain. So they'll file a complaint with the Department of Justice and they'll be like, "Hey, I don't like this. I don't like the Tyler, Texas Police Department." And sometimes they'll get logged and they'll be like, "Okay, an investigation started," simply because you have a data entry, but it's not really a true investigation, right? So people will complain, or in other times, right, some sort of allied agency or nonprofit will will ask the Department of Justice to intervene, or they'll start a lawsuit and bring attention to a department or problem, right? So once this happens, right, we identify some prospective, victims, if you will, of the Department of Justice, but they're not always victims, right? Maybe they've had a lot of victims. This is what's intended to do. At this point, right, if the Department of Justice feels these stories have enough credibility, or there's enough concern in place beforehand, right, they'll start an investigation. And this investigation is mainly focused on the process of finding, not that color. We want to find bad stuff. What's going on with this police department? You guys up to no good? Show us your records, right? What's going on? When that happens, right, a lot of times, this is quite an interesting problem, right? Is that a lot of the indicators that are used to indicate police misconduct are not, collected by the offending police department. What do I mean by that? An offending police department, let's say you were interested in police misconduct, maybe you go by the number of citizen complaints, maybe you go by the use of force incidents, maybe you go by searches and seizures that have certain criteria. Some agencies just flat out don't collect that data, right? It doesn't exist. So it's hard to make an investigative decision on that if there's no data to do it, right? So it's also hard to identify at what point it becomes a problem, or like when the problem behavior is present, or at what point becomes an issue, right? Because you can't have a threshold, right? So if there's no threshold or bright line, how do you really decide that an agency is problematic? So if there's no threshold by design, we can't identify this, right? It creates like a little bit of stickiness because it's like, why are you investing this way? It's been a hard time, right? So the criteria are very unclear, right? And the police department, sometimes will sabotage the investigation and not cooperate. Other agencies are more cooperative and they will share their whatever information they have, right? So, because this is a very antagonistic process, right? Because, it relies on cooperation. And if someone is not cooperating, so it relies on cooperation. If someone's not cooperating, it's not a great look. We'll just say that, right? So without this lack of cooperation, or with this lack of cooperation, you have a lot of opportunities, right? You have a lot of things to possibly figure out based off of some unknown criteria, right? And this is unknown. There will be what's called a technical assistance letter. And this letter is going to announce the findings, right, of the investigation. So it's going to have findings in it. It's also going to list recommendations for change. So they'll be like, hey, did you comply? Did you not? What happens here, right? So with these recommendations, the agency will have a chance to make changes, and if they can make changes quickly, then there's no need to go any further. Oftentimes, though, or actually not oftentimes, or there are situations where, these lists of recommendations are made, agency cannot comply or refuses to comply, and this creates a problem. At this point, the federal government will make a issue to go forward with a consent decree. Consent decree is a little special document, right? So it's a court-ordered agreement. It's also monitored by the court. To fix your shit, right? They want you to come in, they want you to come through and say, hey, how are you addressing these problems? What's good, what's not, fix your shit. If that doesn't happen, then, it can be kind of nasty, right? So that's happening, and there's also a monitor who reports to the court and the Department of Justice. They're supposed to be independent to court on the progress. And they'll come through and they'll say, hey, you need to fix these areas, or this department is, making, progress towards correcting these problems. This department isn't. Here's what's happening. Here's what's not. What's happening, right? So, this is kind of sort of like the, outline of the process, right? So we'll go ahead and